So it's been a bit of a while since we looked at the heating system and how it's doing. I've tried to film this video about 2 or 3 times, so I've got footage spread over the last probably 12 months. But I'm finally going to get around to doing it because a few people have asked for updates and there's a few things I want to share with you. For those of you who don't know, about 2.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, we switched from oil boiler, so oil central heating and water, to wood pellets, which is biomass and a renewable form of kind of fuel for us. We are on the gas grid. You know, there is gas right outside our house if we wanted it, but we decided to go the biomass route for a few reasons. One was obviously it was a greener way of heating our home, and our house is very inefficient just simply because of its age and size. But secondly, there was also the payments at the time. The government's kind of incentive was pretty good, so we decided we'd take, you know, bite the bullet at that point, switch to it, and then, you know, actually in the long run that was going to pay for our boiler and also kind of cover the cost of our heating in our situation. So that's kind of the background. I'll now show you some of the pros and cons of what we've done so far. The boiler itself, I do like. It's been a bit of a love-hate relationship, but it's an Italian brand called Clover, and there's not a huge amount of them kind of in use in the UK, but we decided on the product simply because it was one of the more affordable options, but also it seemed like quite a simple and well-tailored boiler for what we needed. It's not high-tech in any way. It's fairly simple and kind of primitive in how it works, but that was kind of a good thing in the long run because there's no kind of, you know, big computer circuit board behind it that with lots of different modes and things. We need it to switch on, do a burn to heat up our thermal store, which I'll show you in a second, our buffer tank, and then switch off again. You know, we're not pumping this straight around the house. It hasn't got to come on instantly for hot water or anything like that. Now I'll come on to the fuel side of things in a minute, but one of the negatives I would say with a biomass system is the storage of the pellets or the wood chips or whatever you're burning. In our setup here, the boiler itself has a very small hopper at the back of it, which might take 60 kilo or so. I'm not sure exactly on the figures, but I'll link to the kind of specs below. That in our house will last about a day in the winter, so you'd be out here every single day topping it up, and it's, you know, if we were going to be happy doing that, we may as well just put in wood burners throughout the house. So we had this hopper at the same time when we installed this. So this kind of holds an extra, I don't know, 100 kilo or plus, and actually this will give us maybe in the middle of winter almost a week's worth, maybe 5 days. So, you know, I'm happy with that. That's, you know, just one of the jobs around the house to do. We've got to come out, feed the chickens, kind of put the washing on and just top up the boiler. It's no biggie. But if we didn't have that, it would be just a real chore. But you can get another one of these to fit the other side. In the future we may look at that, but it's just sheer space that you've then got to worry about. Next issue to talk about is the pellets themselves, because, you know, that's not as simple as it sounds either. You'll have to excuse the rain hitting the roof. It's I've put a towel up to try and keep it quieter, but that's what the noise is. So these pellets are they're kind of 100% wood. They're just basically compressed sawdust formed into 6mm pellets, and that's what is used for our boiler. They have to meet a certain grade for the whole to be certified by the government incentive, so they have to be A1 plus and kind of have a BSL number, I think it is. But even within that classification, there are loads of different kind of qualities of pellets, really. We've used, this is our 4th or 5th brand of pellets. I picked these just simply because of the price. We use about a ton a month at the moment in the middle of winter, so it's a really costly thing, and if we can just save kind of £20–25, I'm happy to do that. The only problem I've got with buying the cheaper pellets is quite often they're European, so there's quite a lot of transportation needed in that, and if you're trying to get the whole green thing going, then actually importing wood pellets from Eastern Europe is not particularly a good way to go. So I have found some UK suppliers. There's Verdo and there's Woodlets, amongst others. I've used both of those. Verdo tend to be more expensive. We used them on the first batch, but they seem to have gone up a bit. Woodlets we used last time. So far, they're the best pellet I think that we've used. They're really low dust, so when you're tipping the bags in, there's not like loads of dust to worry about. And they're made in the UK, don't know, 100 miles from here, so perfect as far as its green credentials. These ones are unbranded. They are the classified pellets. Nightmare with shipping. You know, I'm not going to moan too much. It was over Christmas period, so you know, I'll just give them the benefit of the doubt. But poor delivery. The actual pellets look very different from our other ones. They're quite, I don't know, almost look papery. I assume they're going to have the same kind of energy value, calorific value, but we'll soon see. Big bags, which is nice because at the end of the day, there's no point in buying, you know, a big pallet of 100 bags or 90 bags or whatever it is, and then you're going to end up with all this plastic afterwards. So even if you can just make the bags 50% bigger, then it's a little bit less plastic. We try and reuse them, so these bigger bags are quite handy. The small ones that are printed up with loads of ink over them and stuff, again, it's not the greenest way to go. I'll show you in a minute the other options as far as buying bagged pellets, but this is how we need to buy them at the moment. So we had a delivery about half an hour ago, maybe an hour ago, and it's tipping it with rain outside. They come on a pallet, normally just pallet wrapped, but I don't like to leave them out because as soon as these things hit water, they swell up like a sponge and they write off the whole bag, or at least, you know, majority of it. So I don't want to risk ruining the actual pellets. Normally I'll bring them in with a sack truck from the drive, which is a bit of a trek in itself, kind of bringing them round, stack them where I'm not going to have to move them again. Because it's raining, I thought I'd bring them in, dump them, so I've dumped them in a long line here. So this is what a ton of pellets looks like. The thing I worry about, really, and the problem I've got, is the actual handling of the pellets. We have them delivered on the front drive because that's the only way the lorry can get to, and he can't use the pallet truck to bring them down the side here because it's just too rough, the ground. So they're left up there and I have to stack truck down maybe 6 at a time and then manually stack them. Now I don't mind that. I can do it in about an hour, maybe 45 minutes from them being dropped off to having them stacked and finished with. So I'll give you a really quick overview of how we have to kind of clean the boiler, or I should say I clean the boiler, this is another job which kind of every maybe 2-3 weeks I just come out and give it a once over. In the summer we turn the boiler off completely, and in spring and autumn it is very, you know, maybe once a month I'll have to come out and just give it a bit of a sweep out and empty the ash box. But you'll see in a minute how efficient this boiler is. The ash it produces from a week's worth, so that's about 200 kilo of pellets, is minute. You know, you could fit it in a shoebox and it goes straight on the garden. So the boiler consists of this kind of main unit, and inside the casing is the actual burn chamber and stove. So what you've got is a big kind of fire brick lined door, and inside there is where all the business happens. But what you've got is at the back there's a hole which has a chute up to where the hopper is. And how pellets are kind of managed, either in small operations like this or in huge big silos where they're pulled into commercial boilers, is they usually use an auger, kind of like an auger bit on a drill, and that winds, pulls the pellets up and drops them into the burn chamber. You can also get vacuum systems as well, but you know, in this system that's how they're fed into the chamber, and they fall down into this burn pot, which is like a crucible, and in the bottom of there's some holes, and the fan kind of blows up through there, and it really is an intense fire. It's nothing like a wood burner, it's not like a flickering log burner type flame. It's a real kind of almost jet of orange flame, and that heats the pipes above. So the pipes run across the top of here like a heat exchanger, pump through, and then go off to heat our water. And this is the ashtray, and you know, that's only a few days worth, but you can see it's just a really light dust, and that's just 100% wood ash, goes straight on the garden, and you know, that's something else that can be reused around the house. There's lots of other things in there to clean out. When I do the kind of deep clean, you have to take the sides off and hoover out the fan at the bottom. But for now, we'll put it all back together and get it all set up. And they call this one the utility boiler. But there's no way really that I'd have this in a utility, certainly not if it was inside the house, you know, next to your kitchen. It's just too dirty really to have there. The cleaning out, although you can be really careful, it's such a light ash that, you know, that can scatter around a little bit and you have to hoover that up. But also just by pouring in the pellets, unless you've got a system sucking them in on a vacuum, that does create a bit of dust when you tip them into the hopper on the top there. So it's really best suited, I think, from experience. I would have it in a garage, or like in our situation here, which is just like an outdoor storeroom. In the future, when we build the workshop, I'm going to probably relocate it there and have a purpose-built sort of boiler room almost for it. And that will tie in with how efficient we can get the pellets to it. And I'll talk about that in a future video, how we're going to design the workflow, or the kind of pellet flow, I guess, from delivery to burn, to make it as efficient as possible. Our boiler is a lot higher than it would be normally. The bottom of the boiler is here. We've got it raised up on a plinth. We've built a concrete kind of hearth almost for it, because the floor level in this room, probably in the future when we raise the roof, will be brought up by about probably about 600 mil. So because of that, we raised up the hearth because we didn't want to mess around with it. It's pretty heavy to start with, so we thought we'll raise it up, and then in the future we can bring the floor level up to match. So that's why it's a lot taller than it would be normally. Turn it back on again. And you can hear the fan start up. So it's not as primitive as a wood burner in any sense. It's quite a kind of modulated burn. It builds up the burn temperature, and then it circles the water around, and once it's hot enough, then it's opened up to the buffer tank and then heats over there. And the fan and the pellet, the rate the pellets drop in, that kind of changes throughout the burn cycle. So it's not just a case of it lights up, burns, and then it dies out. It's quite well controlled, and it's lit electrically by like a little glow plug in there. And so the negatives are, obviously, it's a bit of a ball ache sometimes to bring all the pellets down here, cut the bags, load it up. You've got to order them every month, and you know, there's a bit of manual labour behind that. That isn't for everybody, and at times I'm like wishing we had a gas boiler and we didn't have to worry about it at all. But financially, it's going to pay off in the long run, because of, like I said, because of the incentives and stuff. We come out, you know, tops on that. So let's kind of try and work with the positives, and I just treat it as part of my kind of chores and part of my kind of daily work around the house. Anyway, so things we can do to solve that. We could build a purpose-built pellet store. You can get pellets blown in by a tanker almost, and it's blown in into a silo. And that can be either a purchase one, which are about 3 or 4 grand for a big external one, or you could build something. But you've got to remember, they take up a lot of space, and there's minimum deliveries on those bulk orders, so you pretty much need a single garage, I've worked out, kind of lined, perfectly dry, with the right valve on it. And at this moment in time, we just don't have that space to sacrifice for the pellets. They also, from the quotes I've had, it's bizarre, but they're not much cheaper to have blown in loose than it is to buy them all bagged up, packed on a pallet and delivered. So that's a bit of backwards thinking, but you know, maybe in the future we look at that. You also begin to appreciate the heat a little bit more, you know, the energy you're burning. You've got to go up there and cart the things down and top up the boiler every week. You know, you're going to start just keeping an eye on how much you're using in the house, whether it's the heating or hot water and stuff. And it's also for the kids as well. It's a visual way that they can see, you know, it takes a ton of wood to keep our house warm and dry and hot water in the taps every month. So if they can visualize that, hopefully, you know, in the future they'll start appreciating, you know, what it takes to live and heat in a house, heat up a house. This is the secondary hopper, which sits to the side, and that's it, full of the pellets. So we top up this one, and then that slides down a chute into the boiler, into the other hopper. So we kind of top up this one, and then top up what is left at the top of the second hopper, which is here, and you can see how much smaller it is. Now if this was just a stove in a house, then that hopper at the back is probably enough. You know, you just tip a bag in every couple of days and you'd be heating the room perfectly with that. But this is a pretty big boiler, and it's heating a very large vessel of water, a large volume of water, and that is why we get through so many pellets. So I won't go into endless detail with the heating system, because I think it's covered more in the installation videos, that series, and I'll link to that below and at the end of the video. But how it works, for those of you who aren't familiar with kind of buffer vessels and accumulator tanks, is the water in the boiler goes to this tank and it heats it up to, I think it's about 80 degrees probably, and there's multiple thermostats on there as well. So the whole of that tank is heated to whatever the required temperature is, and that's really insulated. And in the future I'm going to build a wall around that and insulate it further so there's less loss, and it will just kind of hold its heat completely. That water is then pumped around the house, around the radiators, and also around the coil in the hot water tank, which is in the house, which is about half the size of this one. So although it sounds a little bit complex and industrial, it is fairly simple in how it works. You can just basically think of this as a really large radiator within the kind of circuit of radiators, and it just helps to hold the heat. So the heating can come on and heat the house for an hour or so without having to kick the boiler in, because a wood burner, a wood boiler of any form is better if it can just do one really efficient heat and then cut off, rather than trying to do a burn, turn off, burn, turn off. So that's the whole concept behind that. And then lastly, this is all the plant room type gear, which kind of runs the boiler, I guess, and the whole heating system for the house. And yes, it looks a little bit like a plant room in a school or something. It's pretty industrial looking for a house, but it's not quite as complex as it looks. There's our pump there, which does the central heating and also up to the hot water tank in the house, the cylinder. And then separate from that, we've got like a valve and a separate pump that goes off to an underfloor heating. So all of these are basically just flow and return. So as well as the pipes that go to and from the house, there's also to and from the buffer tank. And then there's just lots of other valves where they're kind of drain off points and areas where we can isolate things if we've got an issue with one part. And then finally, this is all the wiring. Now we split the house into 2 levels, so we weren't heating the whole house throughout the day. The heating for the first floor, so for all the bedrooms, is on a separate timer and a separate switch, separate valve, so it opens up just in the morning and evening, whereas downstairs is heated whenever we want it via the Nest, you know, on the iPhone or on the little module. And then the heating as well for the underfloor is on its own. So I'm going to trick the boiler into thinking the door is shut, just to give you a little insight into how everything works. The boiler looks pretty dirty at the moment because it finished mid-cycle. The pellets ran out and the boiler cut off. Normally it kind of self-cleans and burns itself nice and clean at the end of each cycle. So you can see the pellets are now dropping into the back. So there's an auger turning and feeding them up a chute and then dropping down into the burn chamber. And right in there, probably no light, is where the pellets go in, and there's an electric glow plug in there which starts them off, and then obviously once they're burning, they're away. So I'll shut the door now and let the flame start. This is a little viewing window, but it soon kind of smokes up, dirties up, so I have given it a little wipe. We might be able to see the flame in there in a minute. Okay, we're about a minute in now, and it starts smouldering to start with a load of smoke. So you can't really see what's going on, and then suddenly it'll kind of combust, and then as soon as it starts doing that, then more pellets will drop in. The whole thing will pick up speed. It'll go up through the power settings until it's kind of a roaring flame, which it'll sit at until the buffer tank is satisfied, and then it'll kind of close down gradually and clean itself off. So apologies once again for the rain noise. I hope that hasn't been too distracting. I will link to all of the boiler installation videos at the end of the video and also in the description below. But hopefully that gives you a little insight into what it's like living with a biomass boiler. It's not as bad as I probably made it out to be. It's 90% of the time it can just be forgotten like any other boiler. But when it comes to the fuel side of things, it just takes a little bit more effort. But it was more of an experiment. It's something I'd always kind of been interested in and thought about, and kind of glad we did. Sometimes I'm not, but never mind. So thanks for watching. Remember, if you can, do it yourself, and we'll see you in the next video. Good, let's hope the house warms up soon.